Hey everyone, this is a special edition of the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. Today we're talking about the big one, 9/11. There's so much to cover that we decided to each choose one thing instead of trying to be comprehensive. There's just too much to talk about in a single episode. So here we go, no introduction, no mind boggle, because the episode is the mind boggle. Asian ETA will start us off. What do you have for us?
All right, so the topic that I've chosen is the stock market. So there are some red flags, some odd stuff that happened leading up to the attacks on 9/11 that involved the stock market. And most of what it involved was just a couple companies, and it was American Airlines and United Airlines. There was more companies than that, and I'll mention more. Or actually, might as well mention them right now, I guess. Two of the other really big ones were Marsh and Citigroup. Directly related to the attacks themselves. And that's why I choose to focus on those four ones, because how directly related they were to the attacks. So what I'd like to talk about in particular are some of the options that were put on some of the stocks for these companies before the attacks happened. So, I don't know a ton about the stock market. I know a little bit. I think most people, your average person, probably isn't going to be very knowledgeable. So most people know that companies deal in stocks. And a lot of people don't know that you can put options on stocks. And there's two different types of options, puts and calls. So puts are basically a bet on a stock price that it will fall. And a call is going to be a bet on a stock price that it will rise. So if you have an inclination, let's just say, that a company may suffer some kind of tragedy, let's say, that's an easy word to use related to this subject, obviously. If they were to lose public perception in a negative way, then their stock prices are going to fall. Whatever may cause it, some things can cause it. So if you think that's going to happen, you're going to put a put on the put option on the stock. So just to back up a little bit, it's my understanding that the difference between the two is that if you buy a stock in the company, you're basically a part owner. So it's like you're owning part of the company. Whereas an option, when you buy options, you're not buying a part of the company. It's pretty much just like going to Vegas and just putting money down. You're not investing at all. You're just gambling, right? Yeah, correct. And that's an important point to make too, because it's you got to know that about it. It's kind of I've never really been. I don't know a lot about, like I said, the options that you can put on stock, but to me, it's always kind of seemed like kind of a little bit of a dirty thing to do in the stock market, not necessarily an honest thing, you know what I mean?
It's definitely strange.
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple different dates in particular that I'm going to focus on. And like you're saying, even on this particular subject by itself, there's so many different little things that you can talk about, so many different red flags, but I'm going to focus on a couple of them, because what I'm really hoping to accomplish is truly to spark interest in people that listen to this episode. If they happen to be interested in it, trust me, if you look into this topic, either one of these topics, you're going to find out much more than we mentioned on this episode, which is going to be a beautiful thing for you. And I think it's also something that's going to be a little bit of a payoff too, because you're going to start seeing things you're like, wait, what? Right. And, there's things that you've never heard of before. And you're going to be sitting there wondering to yourself, how did I not hear about this before? How come this hasn't been talked about so much?
That's exactly what happened to my topic, but we'll get to that in a little while.
Yes. Yeah. Well, these two topics aren't the only ones either, but these are the ones we're focusing on today. So on September 6th, let me start that one more time here. Edit. On September 6th, Bloomberg data showed that put option volume on United Airlines stock was almost 100 times higher than normal. There was 2,000 options versus 27 options the previous day. Wow. Yeah, I know, right? That's quite a disparity. It's a big difference there. On the 6th and the 7th, the Chicago Board Options Exchange handled 4,744 put options on United Airlines stock. On a day that you would think, because there's no news relating to that company, you'd think that the ratio would be pretty normal, pretty much even, you'd think. The ratio that day was, that ratio was 12-1. It's a huge ratio.
Yeah.
And then on the 10th of September, American Airlines option volume was 4,516 puts and 748 calls. That's a ratio of 6-1. On another day that by all means, you'd think would be normal. Should be somewhere around 1-to-1. No other airline stocks had these type of ratios during this period of time. Just American Airlines and United Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously it's a big red flag, and it's a little concerning on its face. And there's even people that I think that are plenty prominent enough to step back and listen to what they're saying, and make it, what they're saying is going to make you want to look into it. There's a University of Chicago professor of finance, George Constantinides, I think is how you pronounce that name. It's a long name with a whole bunch of syllables, and I hope I'm doing it justice, but I'm not quite sure. But he's quoted to have said, option market trading was so striking that it's hard to attribute it to chance. So something is definitely going on. That's his exact words. If that's coming from this fella, that's got to make you interested at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody that's, supposed to know what's going on. The 4 highest volume of stocks that were suspected, like I said before, was United Airlines, Marsh, American Airlines, and Citigroup. And they were very closely linked, like I had mentioned before. The 2 airlines had airplanes that were hijacked in the attacks and destroyed. Marsh, and this is a very interesting fact, Marsh was located in the exact 8 floors out of the 110 floors in the North Tower that was hit.
Really?
Yeah, where Flight 11 hit, right where they impacted. So that's maybe that's a coincidence. That certainly could be a coincidence, but it's still odd at the very least.
That would be one heck of a coincidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and there's plenty of other ones. So Citigroup was the parent of Travelers Insurance, which was expected to see a $500 million claim put against it because of the attacks. And also Solomon Smith Barney, which occupied all but 10 floors of the World Trade Center Building 7. Because oddly enough, Solomon Smith Barney had both Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney on its advisory board up until January 2001.
Huh. You don't say.
That's odd, right? I'm just saying.
I'd never heard that before. That's really interesting.
Just saying is all, right? Well, then, so let's move on to the 9/11 Commission. Now, I know that we're brushing over a lot of this stuff really fast, but like I said, the purpose of this is to spark interest, and I really, truly hope that people do become interested in these.
You could,
topics.
I mean, any one of these things, it's a thread that you could pull it and just go on for hours and hours looking into each one of these little things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, the 9/11 Commission by itself is a bit frustrating for me, to be quite honest, because so the 9/11 Commission, the way that they describe themselves is they've done exhaustive investigations on the subject when it comes to the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
So the investigations by the SEC and the FBI supposedly uncovered no evidence that anybody with advanced knowledge of the attacks profited from the securities transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So in a footnote, the commission had acknowledged that highly suspicious trading was found, and it was very highly suspicious on its face in particular. Those were the words that they used. But they said that the trading was on United Airlines, and it was the trades were, let me see here, it was traced back to a single U.S.-based institutional investor with no conceivable ties to Al-Qaeda. So even though it was, what they're saying there is, even though it was suspicious, they didn't have any direct links to Al-Qaeda, so therefore they're not guilty.
So let me ask, institutional investor, from what I understand, that would be a large investor, like a mutual fund or a bank.
Yes.
So somebody who's putting, like, let's say $50 million in at a time, or compared to your average investor where you might be investing in a stock with some extra money, you might be putting $2,000 or $5,000 in. That would be your retail investor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Okay.
And so it's a good thing that you mentioned that, because there have been lots of people that have done investigations on this particular subject, and one of them in particular that I think that the professor did a very good investigation. I'll mention him just in a little bit, but it was actually found that Deutsche Bank So there's this entity called Deutsche Bank Alex Brown, or as known as its acronym is DBAB or DBAB. And this included, this company was involved on some of these very suspicious trades, in particular United Airlines stock. So they made, there was a contract for 2,500 stocks ordered that was split into chunks of 500 contracts each, and then routed to multiple exchanges around the country at the same time. On I believe those were on the 10th, if I'm not mistaken. And that's in the 9/11 Commission report. And well, not particularly. It's suspected that when they mentioned the single U.S. bank or single U.S. based institutional investor, it's thought that that's who they're mentioning, either that or the customer who was financing that through that bank.
Mm-hmm. So does that sounds to me a little bit like they're trying to hide the transactions if they're routing it to so many different places.
Mm-hmm. Well, and possibly create plausible deniability as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's all sorts of different ways we can look at this, but there's a lot of red flags that I want to mention just in particular. So right after the attacks of September 11th, many governments began investigations into possible insider trading or informed trading, as most people, the actual term is informed trading, but most people are going to know it as insider trading. So related to the attacks, these investigations included governments from Belgium, Cyprus, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Monte Carlo, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and of course the United States. And it's important to note as well, not one of these investigations resulted in a single indictment.
Wow.
Not one of them, right? But you have a lot of these prominent individuals publicly stating that they believe something very sinister happened. For instance, Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Martino, he made it clear in a public statement what he thought about the situation. He said, and I quote, "I think that there are terrorist states and organizations behind speculation on the international markets." And that's actually a direct quote from that guy. Let me say that again. That's Italy's foreign minister. That's not a position that most people get just by relationship to people that they know. You have to earn. You would, at least you'd hope, right? You never know. But that's a prominent person, and another prominent individual is from a German central bank, from the German central bank president, actually, Ernest Wetlicki. You know about this? Do you know if that's the right pronunciation?
How do you spell it?
It's Welteke.
The W's are pronounced like V's in German, so it might be Welteke or something like that. And
Welteke.
Roll the E too, just for good measure.
Whatever. I'm gonna do my dastardliest, and then we'll go from there. So at any rate, another very important individual. He was the president of the German central bank, Ernest Welteke. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. He said, yeah, I know, right? He said he actually conducted a investigation where he had his own researchers. So what he was looking into was terrorism insider trading, and that's the term that he used, associated with 9/11, of course. And he said that his researchers had uncovered almost irrefutable proof of insider trading. So wow, that's substantial right there. In 2006, there was a professor of finance from the University of Illinois, and his name was Alan Pottishman. And he published an analysis on the airline stock option trades leading up to the attacks. The study came to the conclusion that the put volume was, and I quote, unusually high, which is consistent with informed investors having traded in the option market in advance of the attacks.
Wow.
So that's another, and that guy's a professor of finance. So I mean, he's a fellow that's teaching everybody that's working in finance. Well, I guess that's a.
Well, he lives in that rabbit hole.
Yeah, right. He created part of it, I'm sure. So so part of that analysis is he uses certain statistical techniques to evaluate the conditional and unconditional distributions of historical stock options. And the activities and stuff that create certain trends, I suppose. I don't know all the different terms, but Professor Pottishman showed that the data indicated that informed trading did occur. And that was his straightforward down the middle conclusion. And that analysis, that report is actually pretty easy to pull up. That was one of the first things that came up under a Google search. So that's something that's not hard at all to find that information. I think everybody should look up that report and just scan it over a little bit.
And the numbers don't lie. You're reminding me, I wish I don't remember the exact details, but I did read about a case years ago where the CEO of some company was murdered, and they found the guy that murdered him because the guy that murdered him had had short sold a bunch of shares of the stock before he killed him, knowing that the price of the shares would plummet after the CEO died. And they figured that out only based on the fact that there was an unusually high number of short sales placed on this right before it went down. So there is precedent for this. I mean, they've actually caught real criminals before based on irregularities in the numbers in the stock market.
Hey, that could be something that stands out. If something stands out, then you got to look into it. I mean, at least if you're doing an honest investigation, at the very least. And motives, it always comes back to gaining control or gaining profit. That always seems to be involved in some way, shape, or form. So I think those are like the two first things you could look into as far as motives go. And there's plenty of red flags that seemingly are involved with that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the majority of what I got to say on this subject. Like I had said before, there's a lot more things that we can go into, and there's a lot more things that I had looked at, but I want to keep it simple and straightforward. That way we could spark the interest, and hopefully there's going to be people that look into this and start creating their own opinion as far as just listening to what they hear on TV and going off of that.
All right, my turn?
Yes, sir, boy. Howdy.
I'm talking about something that's actually a fairly recent turn of events. That this happened actually at the beginning of 2019, something called the Dark Overlord hacks, or the 9/11 papers.
Sounds ominous.
It might be. One of the things that blows...
It sounds like I'm sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like a B sci-fi movie, the Overlord hacks, you know? There's an evil spirit that's coming through the internet, and it's going to hack you to pieces.
This stuff it's wacky enough for a B movie, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually.
So for me, this was kind of a really special event for me, because I'd always heard of the 9/11 truthers or whatever, but usually I saw them in terms of like, you know, oh, those are the weirdos that believe that the 9/11 was like, you know, controlled demolition or whatever it was. And I never really took any of this conspiracy stuff too seriously as far as 9/11 goes until this happened. And this I did a complete 180. Like I'm a very, very skeptical person when it comes to all this stuff, but this is the first time in my life, and I'm pretty old. I won't say how old, but, you know, pretty old.
Hey, we all get there if we're lucky, right?
Yeah, you know, you guys are going to get older too. Don't worry about it. But I've never actually experienced something before where I saw it happen. I saw unfolding in real time, basically. So what happened was on New Year's Eve, so 12/31/18, a news story broke. The article came out on Motherboard or Vice. I think it might be kind of the same website. And it was written by a guy named Joseph Cox, who, as a side note, he writes about a lot of really, really cool stuff. So if you want to read some really cool tech articles, just Google Joseph Cox and read his stuff. He's got a lot of really cool stuff. The media coverage, when the story came out, I first saw it on my Google News feed app, and it seemed to me like a really big deal. Like this organization, these hackers, kind of like Anonymous or something, you know, these groups, they hacked these insurance documents and these about 9/11, and I expected to see ongoing media coverage, right? But there was pretty much zero media coverage. I did see a couple of stories over the next couple of days, but they were all basically just retelling what the original story on Motherboard by Joseph Cox said. They were just taking his story and rephrasing it. or just completely copying it, basically. And if you've seen stuff unfolding in the news, you've probably noticed this before. It's not unusual.
Yeah.
But what was unusual is the magnitude of this event and the fact that it wasn't reported on by anybody else, that I saw.
And I actually was not aware of this event at all until you had mentioned it to me. I was like, the Overlord, what?
Nobody's heard.
I had no idea what you were talking
thing.
about.
I've talked to other people of podcasts, and they've never heard of this. And it just blows my mind that nobody's actually heard of this thing. And that's why I wanted to do this as my topic. I read the story on the 1st. So the 1st of the year, January 1st, there's really no media coverage, but there is some discussion of it on a couple of different websites like Reddit and the Above Top Secret forums, some places like that. If you read about conspiracy stuff, you know the places I'm talking about. So there was people talking about it for the next couple of days, but it's really hard to get information on it. So there's not really a whole lot of buzz about it. People are just kind of talking about like, yeah, it happened, whatever. But starting on about the 5th or the 6th, there was a complete and total blackout. So I would search Google and I would not get any Google results on it at all, including stories that I'd already read, like the motherboard stories stopped showing up in Google.
Yeah.
So then
places you had just been the other day.
Yeah. So then when I check Reddit, the stuff on Reddit either got censored or erased. And that was the case for other places too. The discussion just was dead in the water, 100%. And around this time, the Dark Overlord, they were announcing stuff on like Twitter and Reddit, whatever. They had all these social media accounts, and their accounts all got banned from all these places on the same day. The crazy thing is that when this happened, they moved to a website called Steemit. I don't know. Probably most people don't know what that is, but it's basically if Bitcoin and Reddit had a child, it would be Steemit. So it's based on the blockchain. One of the main ideas is that if you write a post on there, it's on the blockchain and it cannot be changed. It cannot be edited. It cannot be silenced. It cannot be censored or whatever. So they went onto Steemit and started announcing stuff there, and they got even Steemit stopped posting. They got censored from Steemit. Their stuff is actually still on the Steemit blockchain because that's immutable. You cannot get that off of the blockchain. There's two parts to the Steemit. There's the blockchain, which you can look at as like, I guess to put it for the layperson, if you've seen the Matrix, it's like all those numbers going by that nobody can really understand without some sort of way of interpreting them. And then there's the front end, which is like the website that interprets the numbers.
Would you be able to say it's like the index of a book that's continuously being written?
I guess you could say that, yeah. But the data is still there. It's just nobody can really get to that data without the front end, without the website part of it. But the website part of it just completely censored it, which is the opposite of what they're supposed to do. The whole point of Steemit is that you can't censor stuff. So
you'd have to be like
they censored it.
You'd have to be like the owner or operator of the website in order to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. 100%. That website is operated in the United States. People think that basically the whoever it is, the deep state or whatever, got to them,
or maybe it was always part of the deep state.
Maybe it is. Yeah,
it's a plant.
There are some other front ends for this blockchain for Steemit where you can see this stuff. One of them's like busy.org, busy.org, for example, where you can still see the Dark Overlord's posts on there, but they got erased from pretty much the entire internet. I've never seen anything like this happen before, where it's like I was watching it get erased from the internet. Like I saw it happen, and I've never seen anything like that before. And so 9/11, I don't know if controlled demolition was a thing. I don't know if there was, I don't know anything about it, but the fact that it got erased from the internet so quickly, that sort of caught my attention, because that can only happen if the government's making it happen. That's not going to happen by itself.
Well, the topic that I covered, there's a little bit of that going on as well. If you look up videos on like YouTube, for example, just I assumed that there wouldn't be really a whole lot on YouTube about it. And there may be something on a video somewhere that doesn't have anything to do with it in the title where it's mentioned, or maybe they, they were savvy and they didn't put it in the title or the first couple minutes on purpose, possibly. But I remember, because the first time I ever heard about this subject was on a YouTube video, and I don't remember the channel that had posted it, but I do remember that in particular. And you go on YouTube now, and good luck finding anything about it, anything that's obviously about it.
No, they've suppressed not only the Dark Overlord, they've suppressed a lot of conspiracy stuff nowadays on YouTube, which is kind of suspicious. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that's just one platform, but
yeah. But what I saw was every platform, even platforms that are supposed to be immune from government censorship, everything got silenced. They got their files that they were uploading, they got taken off of paste bin. I mean, it's just everywhere. They were in a lot of different places and everything got shut down. It was unreal. So I found on a couple days later, on the 8th, I found a website called voat.co. It's like Reddit, but it's not censored. And it's where when people get banned from Reddit, they go here basically. And it's, I can't necessarily recommend it because they'll have a topic.
Is it a very toxic environment?
It's, you can't even imagine. Like, they'll be talking.
Reddit is toxic enough by itself.
Yeah, but some people don't like Reddit. Like, I don't like Reddit. I mean, I like the people on Reddit. I just don't like Reddit. Oh, okay. So when I found this website at first, I was kind of excited about it, but then you go on there and you'll see a discussion that's, pick your topic. And then the first reply will be whatever. And then the second reply will be something along the lines of, it's these Jewish people who are this whatever nasty stuff they're saying about Jewish people. And you're like, whoa, hold on here. That guy's not even Jewish. What do you even, it's weird. It's just like a really weird website.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's totally 100% not censored at all. So it's interesting to go here and see how a website works when it's not censored. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people went there and had a greater appreciation of Reddit, even though a lot of people complain about Reddit being censored. It's one of those be careful what you wish for kind of a things.
Yeah. At some points, some checks and balances are needed in some areas just to control the madness.
Yeah. But if you want, so I'm going to recommend that people do not research this because but if you want to, you can go download the files that were hacked and you can find links to those on vote.co. They're still there. I checked the other day and there's still some discussion threads, but the discussion has kind of died down and I'll get to why it's died down in a little bit.
Okay.
The whole point of this whole thing is that it got completely suppressed and then it just died. But this should have been something that was really huge. I'll talk about why it would be huge in a minute. But first I want to talk a little bit about the Dark Overlord hacking group. This is a legitimate hacking group, and it seems to, as far as I can tell, it started in 2016, and their description, the way they describe themselves, is a professional adversarial threat group. And I kind of got to respect that, even though I may not like what they're doing. From what I found, they've hacked over 50 institutions and companies. One of their main targets is medical records, particularly celebrity plastic surgery stuff that they can release pictures of, naked pictures of celebrities.
Okay.
And also, probably their most famous hack was they hacked Netflix for an unreleased season of Orange is the New Black.
Okay.
And they tried to shake Netflix down, but Netflix refused to pay, so they released the season early. That's probably their most famous hack. So it's definitely a legit hacking group, and the reason I had to look that up is because I'm not really up to speed on all this tech stuff and all these hacking groups. And a lot of the discussion, a lot of people said that they didn't believe it was real, that it was a hoax or whatever. They didn't believe it. But this is a legit group. And if you look at their track history, what they do is they hack for documents or they hack companies for information or data, and they shake down these companies for money. They say, pay us or we're going to release this stuff. Quite often, the companies pay them. And they have released documents in the past that are legitimate documents. And that's important because it establishes that these guys are not hoaxers.
They've actually accomplished some stuff.
Yeah, they're not scam artists who are looking for a one-off payment. These guys are legit hackers, 100% real. You do not want them calling on you because they will hack you and they will release whatever stuff you have or demand a payment. If you're a big institution with lots of money, if you're an individual like, me or Agent ETA, you don't have to worry about these guys because you don't have any money and they're not going to come after you. Yeah. But if you're like a hospital or something, Anonymous is probably the most well-known group of hackers, right? And they're sort of like social activists. They want to accomplish something. They want to make the world a better place. Whether or not you agree with their methods is another thing.
And there's also a lot of imitation anonymous groups out there as well.
Yeah, but these guys, they just straight up said, we don't care about any of that stuff. We only care about money. So they're not hacktivists. I found that term. I didn't know about this word before, so I'm sorry if it sounds ridiculous. but apparently hacktivist is the thing. They're not hacktivists. They only care about the money.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what was in the hacks. Sometime in April 2018, as far as I can tell, they hacked documents from Hiscox Syndicates Ltd. And Lloyd's of London, which are some of the biggest insurers on the planet. These guys, they're just monsters. And also some stuff from Silverstein Properties. Okay. Which Silverstein Properties, also one of the biggest property companies. They do a lot of stuff in New York, but they're huge. They own the World Trade Center.
Yeah. As soon as you said Silverstein, I was like, oh, yeah, I know that name.
The documents all center around what's called subrogation proceedings. I had to look this up. I don't know what this stuff is. Subrogation is when an insurance company has to pay out money, and when they pay out that money, they go after somebody who might be liable for that, and that's subrogation. So let's say, I don't know, if you crash your car because somebody didn't clean up their ice that they put down. Stupid example. But the insurance company pays you for your car because you have a policy. And then the subrogation would be going after whoever left the ice around that made you crash in the first place.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're going after whoever's liable for it, but it's kind of like after they've already paid out on the policy. So that's pretty much the central thrust of all these documents. It's not government documents, it's insurance company documents.
Okay.
The documents, there's supposedly over 18,000 of them, and you can download them. It's a 10 gigabyte file, but there's a catch. There's 5 layers of documents, and each layer had a certain checkpoint to be released based on how much Bitcoin was paid to the Dark Overlord group. So if they got paid, let's say 5,000, they released the first layer and so forth. And they said that the first layer wasn't as juicy as the 5th layer. So the really good stuff was in the 5th layer. The not as interesting stuff was in the first layer. And they released a couple of teaser documents before they even got the ball rolling, just to kind of get people interested.
So just to get it straight, they weren't using this as a bribe, basically for the companies, right? They weren't bribing the companies for money. They were basically saying that if you pay us enough money, we're going to release this really juicy information.
Here's where it gets interesting, because these guys are very clever. So what they did was they told the public, if you pay us $2 million in Bitcoin, we'll release these documents. Okay. And they actually collected some Bitcoins from, well, who knows where they came from, but they did collect some Bitcoin from probably the public, and they did release some documents, but they did not get the 2 million they were looking for. Okay. Rumor has it that they were trying to get $10 million from the private companies. Whether or not they got that, I don't know. We'll talk about a little bit about that later, what happens. But they did release 3 of the 5 layers. They did not release layers 4 and 5. This is basically like a crowdfunding scheme, and they were selling it as basically, we're going to reveal the truth about 9/11. Just give us a little bit of money and we'll tell you what happened.
They were playing it from both sides, though.
Yeah, exactly. What they were doing is they were trying to put pressure on the private companies by releasing documents. They release a little bit of documents, and then the private companies wouldn't pay. So they release a few more documents and they wouldn't pay, and so forth. So they were using the public to create this buzz about it to get the attention of the bigger companies.
Okay.
Because they don't want the 2 million from us. They wanted the 10 million from the companies. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So each layer requires, so you can download the 10 gigabytes of it, right? But it's encrypted. And each layer has an encryption key that you need to use to unlock the files. The first 2 layers were paid for. The third layer was not paid for, but it was still released. And I'll talk about that later. In the documents, the insurance companies go after a lot of different parties, and they're basically looking for defendants that they can recoup some of their money from, like airlines and private security companies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a lot of discussion in these documents about possible targets like terrorists and, terrorists' assets that have been frozen, and foreign banks and stuff like that. One of the things that's interesting in the documents is you get an idea of just how incredibly well funded these lawyers were. So, for example, they obviously were lobbying Congress, and there's a receipt in there to Senator Bob Dole for a payment of $62,500, which is the first of 12 payments, which adds up to $750,000 or so. Just for one senator. That's an incredible amount of money.
It's a nice
for
chunk
lobbying
right there.
one senator. Usually when companies lobby a senator, it's not quite that much money. This is just one senator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the general idea of what's in the documents. Now let's talk a little bit about some specific things in the documents. So first of all, a lot of them are, they're all pretty much like legal speak. It's kind of a foreign language. So if somebody wanted to download them, which I'm definitely not recommending, but if you did, you'd have to know some legal speak. It's very hard to even read these and know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really interesting things revealed in the documents. In the documents, the insurance companies discuss whether or not the Bush administration had prior knowledge of the attacks. There's a document in there summarizing quotes from various administration officials. There's one document that details a meeting, and one lawyer in the meeting said that he expected some very important information about the Bush administration knowing about the attacks ahead of time, but unfortunately, the resolution of that is never revealed. It might be in layer 4 or 5, so it's sort of like this little mystery that's presented. You have this document summarizing, it's like the minutes or whatever. So somebody's taking notes on the meeting as it's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this lawyer says, well, I'm going to have this really good information about prior knowledge that the Bush administration had. I don't have it yet. I'm going to get it soon. But that's never given to us. We never see the document that guy, or the evidence. We never see the evidence that lawyer was talking about. There's nothing in there, as far as I could find, that says explicitly that the Bush administration had prior knowledge, but they talk about it an awful lot.
It is definitely an angle that they're considering. Yeah,
they were definitely looking at that, because you could really recoup some money if you could prove that was the case, right?
Yeah, no doubt about that. The collateral would be substantial, though.
So for me, that was one of the main topics that was worth investigating, was whether or not these documents revealed prior knowledge from the Bush administration. And that's one of the things that the Dark Overlord keeps hinting at that they're going to reveal. But unfortunately, that never happened, because only 3 of the 5 layers got unlocked. So next, a huge list of specific terrorists and co-conspirators is in the document. So lots of people in there, but one of the really interesting things is that it lists Saudi princes. These people are listed specifically, not as Saudi princes as people that might be worthy of investigation, but they list them as co-conspirators.
Potential financiers?
Yeah, no, co-conspirators, not even financiers, but co-conspirators. So they're just saying in these documents that these people, these Saudi princes, the Saudi royal family, they're basically saying that they did it. And it's really kind of interesting because you don't hear that too much on the news.
Mm-mm.
So another thing in there that was kind of an interesting read, there's a document that details, did you hear about James Woods? Do you know about this?
No, I don't believe so.
So James Woods, for all you kids out there, he's an actor who was, in 80s or whatever. He's an older guy, older gentleman,
Mm-hmm.
distinguished, because he's old. He took a flight and he was in first class and he reported 4 suspicious individuals, and he told the air crew and the ground crew when he landed that these people were acting really weird and nothing ever came from it. Well, it turns out these 4 people were eventually hijacked that exact same flight and crashed it into the World Trade Center. So this was probably a dry run. They were on this plane. Probably they had smuggled weapons on there and they were just testing it out to prepare for the real event.
Mm-hmm.
But
Interesting.
this isn't just a fun story because as a Hollywood actor. It's actually pretty alarming because he reported it and nothing happened. Nobody did anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the surprising thing about this one. All right, next up is the World Trade Center Building 7. If you don't know what that is, so the Twin Towers are the ones where airplanes crashed into them. World Trade Center 7, it's one of the shorter buildings next to it that caught on fire and collapsed from building fires. If you look at the official report says that basically office paper and just furniture, stuff in the building caught on fire, and that made it collapse, which is, okay, kind of strange, whatever. But the documents are going after the PONY, which is the Port Authority of New York, because they had fuel tanks for generators in Building 7 with thousands and thousands of gallons of generator fuel, basically diesel fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing about this that makes this really interesting. If you read the official report says that airplanes crashed into the Twin Towers and the jet fuel caught on fire, weakened the steel structures, made the building fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, World Trade Center 7 had these fuel tanks, but it wasn't the fuel that made it fall, it was the paper.
Uh-huh.
So there's sort of a discrepancy here. And
it's weird too because diesel fuel is quite the accelerant. Once it's lit on fire, I've lit diesel fuel on fire before because I used to be a diesel mechanic. It's not exactly easy to light on fire. You could take a lit match and hover it right above. You could just hold it right above an open tray of diesel fuel. It's not going to light on fire. What you're going to need to do is get a torch, something at a much higher temperature. Once you do light it on fire, though, step back because it's going to go with some veracity. You know what I mean? It's going to go, and it's going to. But it's because it's a light oil. Is the reason.
Airplane fuel is almost exactly the same thing as diesel fuel. In fact, I've talked to airplane mechanics who said that you could weld over airplane fuel and it would not ignite.
Really?
It's the same. It's very similar to diesel fuel. It's not as easy to light as regular car gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much the same thing, but it's a lot thicker and it's not as volatile. It has a higher energy density, which is why they use it on airplanes because there's limited space. They need to really get as much as they can out of the fuel.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyways, back to the Building 7, there's an inconsistency here. So airplanes have X amount of fuel. The amount of fuel in these fuel tanks was like 10 times that or 100 times that. It was thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel that's basically airplane fuel, jet fuel in these buildings. But the official report says the fuel in those tanks did not cause the building to collapse, but the fuel in the airplanes caused the Twin Towers to collapse. So at the very least, these insurance documents kind of demonstrate that there's inconsistencies in the official report. Like not just like that's kind of weird stuff, but glaring, obviously weird and obviously incorrect inconsistencies.
Yeah. And so are you aware of the hotel in Madrid, Spain that actually had been consumed by a fire? Have you heard about that?
No, I'm not. I did not hear about that.
I was actually kind of wondering if you're going to mention that or not. But so there was a hotel in Madrid, Spain that is of similar construction to World Trade Building Number 7. So World Trade Building Number 7 and the actual World Trade Towers, Towers 1 and 2 that were hit by the planes, very different types of construction, very, very different types of construction. And most people know that, but World Trade Building 7, that building was more of a standard type of high-rise construction. So you had steel beams, steel girders, and your more typical type of construction. So a very similar type of construction hotel was fully engulfed in Madrid, Spain, after the 9/11 attacks. And it's used very often as a comparison because that entire building, well, an entire portion of the building, I should say, was fully engulfed in flames, and the steel structure didn't give out. There were whole sections of the building where the steel frame of the building was all that was left, and it didn't collapse.
I've actually read in a couple different places, and I've heard on a couple different podcasts, that the only steel frame buildings ever to collapse from a fire are the ones in the World Trade Center. And it kind of makes you wonder. I haven't had a chance to really research that myself, because sometimes people say that and they don't really know all the facts. But I mean, that's like what I was saying before, what we're saying before, is that there's so much to this topic that you could dive into any one of these things, and it's just, it never ends, really. Throughout the documents, they discuss whether or not they can go after the Saudi royal family, and the discussion always ends at, no, we cannot go after the royal Saudi family because the federal government will not let us. And that's kind of a strange thing. Also, suing the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, or any part of the federal government was also off the table. Probably the reason for that is because during this process, the lawyers who are trying to sue all these various different parties absolutely 100% need the cooperation of the federal government, or it will not happen. So they cannot target the federal government or its agencies, or they will not get any cooperation. That's probably why they said that the federal agencies are off the table for lawsuits. So in these documents, there's some depositions. They interview like security guards and just people involved. During these depositions, there were always government lawyers sitting in on the interviews. And you can read the transcripts of these, and a lot of the time, they would ask a question about something mundane, like, I don't know, soda or airplane inspections or whatever, just something that wouldn't even really grab your attention. And the government lawyers would say, stop, you cannot answer that. That is SSI or secret information. Do not answer that question. And it's kind of weird because they just keep doing that throughout the depositions, and there's no really any sense to it. It's just kind of weird. So, okay, so next I want to talk about something that's, it's kind of like, I don't know, I kind of think it's like a bombshell, smoking gun, but then again, I might just be imagining it. I don't know. So in the documents, there's a security circular from January 4th, 2001. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a little long, but there's some excerpts from it. Islamic militant groups publicly have threatened unspecified attacks against U.S. interests. The potential for militant groups or individuals to conduct terrorist operations against U.S. interests increased at the end of 2000. It is our judgment that this threat will remain elevated for the next several months given the likely continuation of violent Israeli-Palestinian clashes, and because recent statements by Islamic extremists have encouraged violence against U.S. interests abroad. The FAA does not have any credible information regarding specific plans by Middle East terrorist groups to attack U.S. air carriers. Nevertheless, some of the currently active groups are known to plan and train for hijackings and have the capacity to construct improvised explosive devices concealed inside luggage and consumer products. The FAA encourages all U.S. carriers to demonstrate a high degree of alertness. And there was another circular from June 22nd that was very similar. It's pretty much the same thing, a little different wording. So I just want to reiterate that these are two circulars from January 4th, 2001 and June 22nd, 2001. just before the attacks, the same year as the attacks. Now, the reason this is important is because these security circulars are supposed to be given to the airlines and distributed to various security personnel so that they know what's going on and they can look out for this stuff. But during the depositions, several of the depositions, they asked security personnel, were you informed about any possible security threats from terrorists? And they said, no, we were not briefed on any terrorist threats. So if there was a security circular, where did it go? Was it circulated? Because it doesn't appear to have been circulated. What happened to this thing? We don't know. We don't know the paper trail. All we know is that this document existed and it was not given to the people who were supposed to get it. That's all the hacks are kind of like this. All the documents in the hacks, there's stuff like this where you kind of have to really read between the lines to see what's going on, but it's hard to say that any of it's really a smoking gun, but there's some really alarming stuff in here. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to comment and say it's something that definitely gives you pause.
Yeah.
Especially if you know a little bit about what they're talking about, some of the lingo that they're using. And
I read this stuff and it kind of makes me do a double take. Like, what? Wait, what?
Well, and insurance companies too are very efficient entities that they don't like to waste. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because of their number one agenda is profit, and also limiting expenditure.
Well, these circulars were probably included in the documents because the insurance companies wanted to establish that the security companies were negligent in that they had been warned ahead of time that there was a security risk and they hadn't done anything to screen for those risks. But when they interviewed these people, and I don't mean they interviewed the CEOs of these private security companies, I mean they interviewed the actual people working there, probably getting minimum wage. The people said in the depositions, and these are from the documents, the people said that they were not briefed on these security threats. So it's just a really kind of a strange thing.
Yeah, if anybody's going to know, well, I mean, I guess that's not necessarily true. If anybody's going to know about security threats, it's going to be the people working the ground. But if there are specific security threats that are going to need to be looked after, going to be looked out for, the people on the ground are going to be the ones doing that work.
I'm going to start listing specific document numbers. Not that anybody should look these up because it's probably a really bad idea to look these up. You'll probably get a virus and the NSA will bust down your door. But should you want to look up these documents, mostly the reason why I'm listing the document numbers is because some of this stuff is so wackadoodle that even though I read it and I took notes on it and then I read it again and I thought to myself, that can't possibly be what I just read. So I looked it up again and read it again. It's still so outlandish that if anybody wants to check in on this stuff. So here goes. So from document number 000-26798. So on July 5th, 2001, the White House had a meeting in their Situation Room. So a quote from this document is, "Something really spectacular is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon." This was said by Richard Clark, the government's top counterterrorism official. The FAA, Coast Guard, FBI, Secret Service, and Immigration and Naturalization were supposedly the people in this meeting. And this is what I mean when there's a lot of documents that kind of point towards pre-knowledge that the administration knew ahead of time what was going to happen and they didn't do anything about it. That's one of the major theories. And it doesn't prove anything, but this document is pretty much as close to a smoking gun as I've found so far.
Okay.
And I'm just putting that document number out there from the TDO hacks. Should anybody want to look it up to see for themselves, it's 000-26798. Not that you should look that up because it's probably a bad idea. Okay, another one from document 000-10135. Aviation experts agree that knowing right away that the planes had not crashed but had been commandeered might have cut precious minutes off the time it took the FAA to decide to contact the military. This may have allowed the military to intervene as they did on the flight in Pennsylvania. Okay, wait. Record scratch, right? So let me read that last sentence again in case you didn't catch it. This may have allowed the military to intervene as they did on the flight in Pennsylvania. They're talking about Flight 93. The story goes that Flight 93 was retaken by passengers and then the plane crashed somehow. So the military, the Air Force, has very specific terminology. There's a word they use all the time called intercept. Now, when they say they intercept something, that doesn't mean any specific action was taken. That just means that maybe they scrambled some jets. The jets went from point A to point B being whatever it is they're checking out, and they intercepted point B. That does not mean that they shot something down. Intervene has a completely different definition. It could mean any number of things, but in this context, it strongly suggests that the military shot down Flight 93. And that opens a whole can of worms, because the official narrative is that these heroes on this plane retook the plane from the terrorists and then it crashed while they were fighting for their freedom. That is a narrative of heroes, of American heroes, that cannot be questioned. But if the military shot this plane down, it changes everything. So if people retook this plane, these heroes, why did the plane crash if they retook the plane from the terrorists? So a lot of people are wondering, did they shoot the plane down because it was retaken by the passengers? So if it's retaken and the passengers land the plane, now you have all these witnesses and you have these terrorists in custody who can be questioned and all this other stuff. So did they shoot it down because they wanted to prevent that from happening in the first place?
Well, and also one of the big questions that people had initially right away is when they saw the videotape and the footage, the photos of that field where that plane was supposed to have crashed. Most people that have seen a crash site of a plane would say that did not look like your typical crash site. Where are the large sections? Where are the large sections of the plane? You know, there's this indentation in the ground where it looks like something has been gouged away. Or earth has been gouged away, but there's not much material. You can see like stuff, debris on the ground, a little bit of smoke, but that was about it.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of discussion around the cell phone calls with Flight 93. A lot of people think that those calls were faked and the whole thing was sort of staged. But if it was staged, then I don't know how that really plays into the narrative of the military shooting it down. But it calls into question everything that we've been told. If they shot down this plane and they're lying to us about it, what else are they lying to us about? And this is not, they're just lying to us about some security information or whatever. This is a pretty big deal if they shot this plane down. This is not a little white lie. This is a big lie. And it appears based on this document that they're lying about it. So just to repeat, the document number is 000100135. It is bananas. Absolutely bananas. Okay, so moving along, there's a deposition I found from February 11th, 2008, and it's labeled, the title has highly confidential SSI material. So basically top secret, don't show it to the public. So here's a quote from that document. Yes, in terms of the measures I cited in the Masari trial, that we could have imposed by security directive from the FAA perspective if the carriers had that sort of information in the context of the time prior to September 11th, they could have gone and done it on their own. Certainly they would have had to talk with us. So the way this is worded, this is a deposition. This is somebody talking. It's a transcript of somebody talking.
I mean, it sounds to me like he's beating around the bush.
Yeah, so they're trying to kind of not say anything, but they're basically saying that it could have been prevented if they'd had security circulars given from the FAA to the airlines. But if you remember, I just talked about 2 different security circulars that are in these documents that were supposed to have been given to the airlines, but why weren't they? The information was definitely there. There was definitely information that they should have been looking for terrorists, but that somehow that information did not get to the security guards or the airlines.
Mm-hmm.
So this quote is not really a smoking gun. It's just sort of another feather in the cap of, the administration covering up pre-knowledge or whatever you want to call it.
Well, and a lot of times I don't think enough people take the perspective of totality.
Yeah.
And it's, when you have an event like this, like 9/11, there's so many different things that you need to take into account. I mean, take into account things that happen in the stock market. After the fact, as of recently, we have these overlord hacks.
Yeah.
You can also look into the physics of the event itself. There have been people that have taken the footage and timed how fast that structure fell, how fast all the structures fell, and they fell close enough to free fall speed where it doesn't make enough sense given the amount of material involved. There should have been more resistance as far as how fast those structures fell. You can talk about demolition, what have you. I think you kind of have to talk about demolition when you talk about that, because what else would help those buildings along, and what else would get rid of that all that material coming into contact with each other.
I never took any of this stuff seriously until I saw in real time this dark overlord hacks being erased from every corner of the internet, completely scrubbed.
And then you also look at how fast they got rid of the debris. They got rid of that debris extremely fast, and as a matter of fact, they boasted about it as well. Mm-hmm. You're talking about the biggest crime scene in American history, and they took great effort to get rid of that evidence, because that's what all that debris is. That's all evidence. Now, you may not need all of it, obviously, but you're going to need a good amount of it. You're going to at least want to take a good survey of where everything fell, how it fell. And one of the things also that people mention, especially people that lived in New York and observed things as they were happening, there's a lot of people that state the rubble pile was very short. It wasn't very tall, and there wasn't a lot of chunked up concrete. Most of the concrete was very pulverized. You didn't have these giant chunks of concrete that you would have expected if everything was broken up by the weight of the rest of the building coming down on top of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
there's some things that just don't plain add up.
Yeah. Let me wrap up the Dark Overlord hacks though. So that's all the specific stuff from the documents that I wanted. That's not everything in there, but those are a couple of highlights. There's not a whole lot of stuff that wasn't already publicly known or suspected. The documents in general go along with the official narrative. And some people talk about it being that the insurance companies had to work within the official narrative in order to get their job done. Because if they started talking about controlled demolition or something like that, then the government would not have played ball and they would not have been able to complete their subrogation, and they would have been out that money. But it does also reaffirm some things we already knew. For example, justice doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't matter who did what. It just matters where the money's coming from and where it's going. So, for example, Saudi Arabia, they pay tens of millions of dollars to lobby our government. Often they do this in a roundabout way for legal reasons, so they'll pay off private companies in the US who then in turn lobby for the Saudi Arabia companies. This could be a whole episode on itself. So if, hashtag look it up, but there's a lot of shenanigans. But in addition to lobbying, it goes further. Saudi Arabia invests billions and billions in dollars, not just in established companies, but also in startup companies, particularly in Silicon Valley companies. It's hard to find the information about how much they own of what, but it wouldn't surprise me if they owned 60% of Twitter, and that's why there's no talk about the Saudi family being liable for this stuff, is because they can silence it because they own everything.
They can control the flow of information.
Yeah, I don't know how much they own, but they own a lot, and they're named many times in these documents as possible targets for subrogation, co-conspirators, people who are probably responsible for the 9/11 attacks, and yet it's completely irrelevant because they got their hands in the right pockets. So they can get away with, they can kill American citizens. They can, thousands of Americans dead, a complete shift in our whole government and everything. Our lives, our constitution is now garbage. And it could all be because of some Saudi Arabian princes that will never face justice because they're rich enough to where they don't have to. And I think that's the part that really just bothers me the most about it. But so moving on from that, anybody trying to look up this stuff, if you Google it, you might find some things, but it's really hard to find stuff. You're not going to get any results for YouTube or whatever. The best place to find this stuff is go to your favorite local neighborhood conspiracy forum and search for it there. Search for it on Vote. You can search for it on Reddit, but you might have to search for it on like archived versions. Maybe you have a search engine that isn't Google that's not as well known and not as controlled that can find this stuff. But it's really hard to find this stuff. There's a blog, I think it's called Flying Cuttlefish, that has a lot of links to some of this stuff, but it's really super hard to research. So good luck. But if somebody out there, maybe you're a lawyer and you can find stuff that I wasn't able to find, please let us know, because I would love to know more about this. One of the most frustrating things about this whole event is that there's 5 layers. 3 of them have been unlocked. There's 2 layers that are unlocked that might have the answers in it. And you could download it and have those on your computer. The data is there, but it's all gobbledygook until you get the encryption keys. So it's super frustrating to me that it's there. It's right there on your computer. Well, I didn't download it because, that's probably not a good idea. But, if I did, it's like kind of on the tip of your tongue, or it's on the other side of the door. It's like right there. The answers are right there potentially, but you have to have these keys to unlock them.
Or even just to have good knowledge of the potential for the answers. Because a lot of people, and I don't necessarily disagree with this mentality. There's more people out there that agree with the accepted narrative given to us by the government than accept, that there might have been something very fishy that happened, like a conspiracy.
Right. Well, the documents, they don't necessarily have smoking guns, but at the very least, they really highlight just how incompetent our government and our airport security was to allow this to happen. And they also really strongly support the idea that the administration had pre-knowledge of the events and didn't do anything about it, or even actively worked against preventing them. But again, there's no proof, there's no smoking gun. It's all just very, very circumstantial, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So one more thing about the Dark Overlord that's kind of strange. So they've been very active since 2017, but when this happened, I haven't been able to find any activity of them starting about 7 months ago. So it looks like they've gone completely silent. And when they released the key for layer 3, they didn't release it. Normally when they release the keys for this stuff, they had these announcements with all this fanfare, and they'd say, we're going to do this nasty stuff and release these documents, and they'd be very witty and funny about it and stuff. You can look up their stuff. It's archived, and it's actually kind of a fun read. But when layer 3 was released, there was none of this stuff. In fact, it was released on somebody else's Twitter account, on a guy named Gary Webb on his Twitter account. Now, there's a journalist, Gary Webb, but he died from what I can find. He passed away in 2004, I think. So it's probably not that guy, but it's not the Dark Overlord. It's not their Twitter account, because they got erased from Twitter. So somebody completely unrelated to them maybe released the key for layer 3. And what this looks like a dead man switch. It looks like they got caught and they got silenced, and the layer 3 key got released. And that kind of that's kind of tantalizing to me, because maybe at some point the keys for layers 4 and 5 will be released. But
I don't know, if it was a dead man switch, do you think that they would go ahead and release all of them at once, or how do you think that would work?
I don't know for sure, but it would make sense if they'd only do layer 3, because what they would want to do is they wouldn't want to give all their stuff away for free, right? It looks like the Dark Overlord was silenced and they had their dead man switch activated for layer 3, but I keep my eye out, man. I hope to see them pop up again to see more information released, but I'm not holding my breath on that. So that's pretty much all I have on the Dark Overlord. Final thoughts for 9/11, Agent ETA?
So in closing, besides the two topics that we've already covered today, I would recommend looking into a couple other things. One of them in particular is the congressional hearings looking into the trillions of dollars missing out of the defense budget that was leading up to the September 11th attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended because the evidence for all these hearings, the investigation into the missing money, all that evidence was being stored in databases that were in World Trade Building 7. Coincidentally, so once that was all destroyed, they had to end the investigations because they lost all the information. So one of the people that were being questioned thoroughly, I guess I'll put that up in air quotes, thoroughly, in these congressional hearings, it was Donald Rumsfeld, which everybody knows as the Secretary of Defense at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back and look at these hearings, the questions that they're asking are all, in my opinion, all softball questions. And there's even times where they're literally sitting around joking and laughing. And after the fact, I'm looking at these videos after the fact, so I have a certain perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm biased, right? So, but to me, it looks like they're just killing time.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it looks like to me, because they never ask him any hard-hitting questions, anything with any real ramifications. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would look into the congressional hearings involving the trillions of dollars that were missing out of the defense budget. I would look into the physics of the buildings falling themselves, because it is questionable. When you look into the construction of World Trade Building 7, it just, the way it fell is suspect. I don't know what to tell everybody. Like if you watch that footage and you see how straight that, now obviously, like, the term that people like to use is it fell into its own footprint. That didn't happen to any of those buildings, but they fell close enough to it. They fell close enough to the straight down movement that, man, it's questionable. It looks weird. It's too perfect the way they fell.
Yeah, and that's one thing that really surprised me when I started looking at this is everywhere. It's very similar to the JFK assassination, where the more you look into it, the weirder it gets. It never ends. Like the indestructible passport, or the buildings falling at free fall, or falling perfectly or near perfectly into their own footprint.
Yeah.
Just
one thing, if I could also just interject one more thing.
Yeah.
As far as research, one thing that I've noticed recently, especially, is a lot of videos on the internet have been purged, and there is less stuff on the internet involving 9/11 to draw from, less information. There's still all sorts of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff, but with certain topics, I would actually suggest going out and getting books that are written on 9/11.
Yeah, there's a lot of dead links out there. A lot of dead links.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And those books, if you get a hard copy, well, that's a tangible piece of information right there that you'll have as long as you take care of that book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's wrap this one up with a quote as usual. This time I got a quote from President Eisenhower. I thought this one was appropriate. This is from his farewell address when he was leaving. This is just excerpts from that, not the whole speech. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every statehouse, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that the security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocation, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet, in holding scientific discovery in respect as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time.